The planet of Norath was a world of towering mountains, dense forests, and vast cities that stretched across the horizon. The people of Norath, known as the Zorathians, were an ancient species with rich traditions. They had always considered themselves superior to the humans, who lived far away on a small planet called Earth. For centuries, the Zorathians had remained isolated from humans, believing that their advanced culture and purity of blood made them far superior. But that all began to change when the humans sent a delegation to Norath. Zorina was a leader among the Zorathians. She was known for her wisdom, strength, and unshakable beliefs. As a child, she had been taught that humans were nothing more than primitive creatures, incapable of understanding the ways of the Zorathians. To her, the idea of mixing their blood with humans was unthinkable. It wasn't just a matter of pride, it was a matter of survival. The Zorathians had evolved over thousands of years to be the perfect species, and they had no intention of weakening their legacy by allowing humans into their gene pool. Zorina's views were shared by many in her society, especially among the older generation. They believed that humanity's presence in their world would only bring chaos and corruption. It was a belief that had held strong for generations, and Zorina was one of its fiercest defenders. She spoke openly against the idea of human involvement in Zorathian affairs, especially when it came to something as sacred as breeding. She was determined to protect her people from what she saw as a threat to their very existence. Her reputation as a fierce leader and protector of her species had earned her the respect of her people, but it had also made her a target for those who believed in the possibility of peace with the humans. A few among the Zorathians had begun to question the old ways, arguing that the future of their species depended on their ability to adapt and form alliances with other civilizations. Zorina, however, would have none of it. She firmly believed that any compromise with humans was a betrayal of their culture and heritage. The humans, led by a soldier named John, had come to Norath with a peaceful mission. Earth was facing a crisis, and they needed the Zorathians' help. The humans had long admired the Zorathians' technological advancements and wisdom, and they believed that by working together, they could overcome the challenges facing both worlds. But there was one thing the Zorathians had yet to understand. Humanity had a different approach to problem solving. They didn't rely solely on their technology or strength. They relied on something deeper: human connection, empathy, and love. John had been chosen to represent Earth in this mission. He wasn't just any soldier. He was a diplomat, trained in the art of negotiation and understanding. His calm demeanor and strong sense of justice made him the perfect candidate for the delicate task at hand. However, he knew the Zorathians would not be easy to convince. Their leader, Zorina, had made it clear in her speeches that she would never accept the idea of humans as equals. As the day of the diplomatic meeting approached, the tension on Norath was palpable. The Zorathian leaders had made it clear that they would not entertain any discussion of breeding with humans. They considered the idea absurd and offensive. But despite the resistance, the humans were determined to make their case. They had sent their best negotiator, and they hoped that by showing respect for the Zorathian culture and offering a solution to their problems, they could persuade them to join forces. Zorina stood on the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. It was a sight she had seen 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different. The arrival of the humans had unsettled her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had spent her entire life fighting against the idea of humans being involved in Zorathian affairs, and now, the humans were here, ready to challenge everything she believed. As the meeting drew closer, Zorina couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had been taught that humans were weak and foolish, but the stories of their resilience and determination were beginning to wear on her. She had heard that the human soldier, John, was different from the others. He wasn't like the warriors she had encountered in the past. He was calm, collected, and seemed to have an understanding of the world that went beyond mere survival. Zorina shook her head, dismissing the thoughts as foolish. She couldn't allow herself to be swayed by the charm of a human soldier. She had a duty to her people, and she would not allow some passing diplomatic mission to change that. She had made up her mind, and nothing would make her change it. That night, the meeting between Zarina and John took place in the grand hall of the Zarathian palace. The atmosphere was tense as the two leaders stood across from each other, facing off. John, dressed in the formal attire of a diplomat, looked calm and composed. Zarina, on the other hand, stood tall and proud, her posture rigid and unyielding. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, her mind already made up about the human race. John spoke first, his voice steady and confident. Zarina, I understand your concerns. I know that humans are not the same as the Zorathians, but I also believe that together, we can build something stronger. We don't have to be the same to work together. Zarina's eyes narrowed. You speak of cooperation, but you fail to understand the depths of our culture. You want to mix your blood with ours to destroy what we have fought for. This is not a matter of diplomacy, human. It is a matter of survival. John didn't flinch. I understand your fears, but I also know that survival isn't just about strength. It's about adaptation. The universe is changing, and we must change with it. Zarina remained silent, her mind racing. She couldn't deny that his words were unsettling. But no matter how convincing he seemed, she would not let him sway her. She had to protect her people no matter the cost. The grand hall of the Zarathian palace was silent, except for the faint hum of energy fields that pulsed through the walls. Zarina stood across from John, still processing his words. The tension in the room was thick, and both leaders could feel it. John, however, remained calm, his eyes never leaving Zarina's piercing gaze. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't about to back down. Zarina, for her part, had every intention of staying firm in her beliefs. She had been taught from childhood that humans were weak, that they had no place in the advanced world of the Zorathians. Her people had spent centuries evolving, building a culture and a society that was pure and strong. To think that this human soldier would stand before her and suggest they share their bloodline was offensive. Your species does not belong here, Zarina said coldly, her voice firm but controlled. You are not welcome in the breeding programs of our people. There is nothing about humans that can strengthen us. John didn't flinch. He had expected this. He knew the Zorathians were proud of their history, their culture, and their purity, but he also knew that their way of thinking had been built on isolation, and sometimes isolation led to weakness. He wasn't here to force them to change, but to show them a path forward, a way to coexist that didn't require destroying either culture. We don't need to destroy your culture, John replied calmly. We just want to share in it, learn from it. Earth is facing challenges that we can't solve alone. We need the wisdom and strength of your people. But to do that, we must understand one another. That means accepting each other even if it's difficult. Zarina's eyes narrowed. The human soldier was persistent, and something about his words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had heard stories of human resilience, of their ability to adapt and survive in harsh conditions, but it still seemed impossible that their race could offer anything meaningful to the Zorathians. You speak of survival, but survival is not the same as thriving, Zarina said, her voice gaining strength. We have thrived for millennia without the need for outside help. You humans are too young, too unstable. Your world is filled with conflict, chaos, and corruption. We do not need your kind weakening us. John listened to her words, but he didn't agree. He had seen enough of humanity's flaws to know they had their fair share of darkness. But he also knew the light that existed within them, their compassion, their drive to build, and their willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. You may be right about our past, John said, his tone soft but steady. But our future is different. We've learned from our mistakes. We've fought wars, lost friends, and faced destruction. But through it all, we've never given up. That's what makes us strong, and that's why we're here asking for your help. Zarina crossed her arms over her chest, staring at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She had never met a human quite like him, Most humans she had encountered were crude, loud, and aggressive. But John was different. His calm demeanor, his unshaken resolve, it was almost admirable. Still, she would not let him break her resolve. She had seen firsthand what happened when species like hers became complacent, when they allowed others to infiltrate their societies. The purity of the Zorathian race had been their strength for centuries. She couldn't let that go, no matter how convincing the human soldier was. "You speak of sacrifice," Zarina said, her voice softer now but still firm. "But you forget one thing. Our people have already sacrificed much. We have fought wars of our own, and we have lost more than you can imagine, but we did not ask for help. We stood alone, and we survived. That is our strength." John nodded slowly, understanding her point. But he also knew that their strength, though impressive, could not guarantee their survival in the long run. The universe was changing, and the old ways of thinking were becoming less and less effective.
If they didn't adapt, they might not survive the next challenge. "I respect your strength, Zarina," John said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "But sometimes, strength isn't enough. We don't have to be the same to work together. We
Can be different and still help each other. Together we can face what's coming, but only if we put aside our fears and prejudices." Zorina was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had never considered that before. Could it be possible? Could the humans really offer something of value to her people? She didn't know, and the idea unsettled her. She had spent her entire life believing that the Zorathians were the superior species, that their culture was unmatched in its purity. But now, here was this human soldier, calmly and confidently suggesting that they could be stronger together. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft buzz from the communication panel on the wall. Zarina glanced at it and then looked back at John. "We will continue this discussion tomorrow," she said curtly. "There are other matters that need my attention." John nodded, understanding that he hadn't convinced her yet, but he wasn't giving up. He wasn't going to walk away just because she had dismissed him. The fate of both their species depended on this conversation, and he would keep pushing until she understood that. As Zorina turned to leave, she glanced back at John. For just a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her pause. It wasn't just determination. It was something deeper, a quiet hope, a belief that things could be better. Zorina quickly shook off the thought, unwilling to acknowledge the flicker of doubt that had appeared in her mind. She was Zorina, the protector of her people, and she couldn't afford to be swayed by the words of a human. But as she left the room, her mind was far from settled. The soldier's words echoed in her mind, and she knew she couldn't ignore them forever. The next few days were filled with meetings, talks, and the delicate exchange of ideas. John continued his diplomatic efforts, trying to convince the Zorathians that their future depended on cooperation between the two species. Zorina, though polite, remained distant and firm in her beliefs. She had not changed her stance on humanity, and she continued to view them with suspicion. However, as the days passed, something began to shift in Zorina's mind. She couldn't deny the strength of John's words, nor could she ignore the strange sense of respect that had begun to grow within her for him. She had never met a human quite like him. He wasn't just here to make a deal. He truly believed in the possibility of a better future for both their worlds. One evening, as Zorina walked through the lush gardens of the palace, her thoughts were interrupted by an urgent message from one of her guards. A group of hostile Zorathian extremists had attacked a nearby settlement, and Zorina was immediately called to action. These rebels were opposed to any form of cooperation with the humans, and they had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to prevent the peace talks from succeeding. Zorina wasted no time. She quickly donned her battle armor and rallied her elite guards to head toward the settlement. As she prepared for battle, her mind was still clouded with doubt and confusion. The human soldier's words lingered in her thoughts. Could there truly be a way to work together? Was humanity's offer of cooperation genuine, or was it all a trick? She tried to push these thoughts aside as she focused on the task at hand. The extremists were dangerous, and Zarina had a duty to protect her people. Meanwhile, John had been briefed on the situation. He knew that this was a critical moment for the peace talks. If the extremists were allowed to disrupt the negotiations, it would set the two species back by centuries. He also knew that Zarina's leadership was key to resolving this crisis. Without hesitation, John suited up in his combat gear and joined the Zarathian soldiers. Although he was a human, and though he had no direct authority over the Zarathians, he knew that his involvement would help bridge the gap between the two species. If the Zarathians saw him fighting alongside them, it might help them see humans in a new light. As the group moved toward the settlement, John could see the determination in Zarina's eyes. Despite the uncertainty surrounding her, she was ready to lead her people into battle. John admired her strength and leadership. He also knew that this battle could prove to be more than just a physical confrontation. It could be a test of their future together. The settlement was under siege. The rebels had taken control of the outer perimeter and were attacking the civilians within. Zarina's heart raced as she prepared to lead her team into the fray. She was no stranger to combat, but this was different. The situation was more complicated than a simple battle for survival. She was now not only fighting to protect her people, but also to maintain the fragile peace that had been established with the humans. As the first wave of rebel forces was met with resistance, Zarina and her guards moved in, striking down the attackers with swift precision. John fought beside them, his experience in combat proving valuable in coordinating their movements. Despite the chaos of battle, John's presence seemed to have a calming effect on the Zarathian soldiers. They were used to fighting alone, but now they fought as a united front, with humans and Zarathians standing side by side. Zarina, though focused on the battle, couldn't help but notice how efficiently John moved, his every action precise and deliberate. His calmness in the midst of the chaos was both impressive and unsettling. She had always viewed humans as impulsive and reckless, but John was different. He fought with a quiet strength that seemed to match the disciplined nature of her people. As the battle raged on, Zarina found herself facing one of the rebel leaders. The two locked eyes and a fierce struggle ensued. Zarina was faster, more skilled, but the rebel leader was relentless. In the midst of their fight, Zarina was caught off guard, her foot slipping on the uneven ground. The rebel leader took advantage of the moment, striking at her with a sharp blade. Time seemed to slow as Zarina braced for impact, but just as the blade was about to strike, a figure moved quickly between them. John. He deflected the blow with his own weapon, taking the full force of the attack on his shield. The force of the strike sent him stumbling back, but he didn't fall. Zarina watched in shock as John steadied himself, pushing forward with renewed strength. Without hesitation, Zarina sprang into action, finishing the fight with a quick and decisive move. The rebel leader fell to the ground, defeated. Zarina turned to John, her heart racing. He had saved her life. "Why did you do that?" Zarina asked, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. She had always believed that humans were weak, that they would never be able to understand the importance of protecting her people. But here was John, standing in front of her, bloodied but unbroken, having risked his life to save hers. John looked at her, his expression calm despite the blood on his armor. "I'm not here to fight against you, Zarina," he said quietly. "I'm here to fight alongside you. We both want the same thing, a future where our people can live in peace." Zarina was speechless. She had never seen such determination in a human before. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The barriers she had spent her life building, barriers against the humans, against change, against the unknown, began to crumble. She couldn't deny the truth of John's words. For the first time, she saw him not as a human soldier, but as an ally. The battle was won, but Zarina knew that this was only the beginning. The rebels had been defeated, but the real challenge lay ahead, convincing her people that cooperation with humans was not only possible, but necessary. As the dust settled, Zarina turned to John. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've proven more than I could have imagined. John smiled, though his face was bruised from the fight. "We're not finished yet," he said, "but this is a step in the right direction." Serena nodded, her mind swirling with thoughts of what the future might hold. She had once believed that the Zorathians could stand alone, but now she knew better. The universe was changing, and if her people were to survive, they would need to change with it. And maybe, just maybe, humanity had something to offer after all. The days following the battle were quieter than Zorina had expected. The rebellion had been crushed, but the peace that followed was fragile. The Zorathians had long prided themselves on their strength and independence, and the idea of collaborating with humans still felt like a betrayal to many. Zorina, though, could feel the shift inside herself. For the first time, she was not as certain of her old beliefs. She spent hours alone in her private chambers, thinking. The memory of John stepping in to protect her haunted her thoughts. Why? Had he done it? He had no reason to risk his life for her. They were from two completely different worlds, two species that had never considered each other equals. And yet John had acted as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Zorina couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to him, something deeper than the soldier standing before her. She had seen humans before, but none like John. Most were eager for power or glory. They fought for their own survival, their own pride, but John fought for something greater. He fought for the future of both their people, for something that transcended pride or history. A soft knock at the door broke Zorina from her thoughts. She stood up, quickly adjusting her tunic, and walked over to open it. Standing in the doorway was one of her most trusted aides. "Zorina, there is someone here to see you," the aide said, her voice tense. "It's the human soldier, John." Zorina felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't seen John since the battle, and though she had thought about him often, she hadn't expected him to come to her personally. She motioned for the aide to let him in. John entered the room looking the same as always, calm, collected, but with the unmistakable signs of someone who had been through a battle. His armor was scuffed, and his face was slightly bruised. Yet, there was a quiet strength about him that Zorina had come to respect. He bowed his head slightly, his expression earnest. "Zorina," he said softly, "I wanted to speak with you." Zorina nodded, gesturing to a seat at the table. "Please have a seat. What is it you wish to discuss?" John took the seat, but he didn't immediately speak. For a long moment, there was silence between them, a silence that felt heavier than it should. Zorina studied him, trying to understand the emotions behind his calm exterior. She had seen many leaders before, but none like John. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who believed in something greater than himself. Finally, John spoke, breaking the silence. "I know that you have your doubts. I know that you've spent your life protecting your people, keeping them safe from outside influence. But I'm here to ask you to trust me, and trust humanity." Zorina frowned. She had heard these words before many times from different humans, but there was something different about the way John said it. There was no arrogance in his voice, no hidden agenda. It was simple, honest. "I've seen what you're capable of, John," Zorina replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've seen your strength, your courage, but that doesn't change everything I've believed for my entire life. The Zorathians have always been independent. Our survival has depended on our purity, our ability to stand alone." John leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I understand that, but we're facing a future neither of our species can survive alone. There are threats out there, greater than either of us can imagine. And if we don't stand together, if we don't find a way to trust each other, we'll fall separately." Zorina felt a pang of discomfort in her chest. She had never allowed herself to consider the possibility of such a future. Her entire life had been built on the idea that her people were stronger alone. The very idea of needing anyone else, especially humans, felt like a weakness. But John's words planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Could it be true? Could humanity and Zorathians really work together? Could they survive a future that was beyond the power of either species to face alone? She stood up abruptly, walking over to the large window that overlooked the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the landscape. The sight should have been peaceful, but Zorina felt restless. Her mind was spinning, caught between the weight of her duty and the unknown future that John was asking her to embrace. John followed her, standing at a respectful distance. "I know this is hard," he said, his voice gentle. "But I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that we have more to offer each other than we've ever realized." Zorina turned to face him, her expression conflicted. She had been raised to see humans as inferior, as creatures whose culture was weak and flawed. And yet, here was John, standing before her, asking for a chance that could change the course of history. She took a deep breath. "And what if I don't believe in this?" she asked quietly. "What if I can't accept that our future depends on humans?" John's gaze softened. "Then we fight on our own. But at least we'll know we tried." Zorina met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw the depth of his belief. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, a vision for a future where both their peoples could thrive side by side. Zorina felt her heart flutter, and for the first time she allowed herself to consider the possibility. Maybe John was right. Maybe there was more strength in unity than in isolation. And maybe, just maybe, humanity could be the key to their survival. She didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she turned back to the window, her mind still racing. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This conversation, this moment, had changed everything. John waited in silence, knowing that Zorina's decision would not come easily. But for the first time, he believed that there was hope, that the impossible could become possible. The days that followed Zorina's meeting with John were filled with uneasy silence. Zorina found herself torn between the weight of her duty and the strange, growing connection she felt toward the human soldier. She had always been firm in her beliefs in the idea that the Zorathians could not afford to lower themselves by accepting human influence. But now, for the first time, that certainty was slipping away. John had given her a new perspective, one that was difficult to ignore. His words echoed in her mind. If we don't stand together, we'll fall apart. Could it really be that simple? Could humanity truly be the ally they needed to survive the threats lurking in the galaxy? But every time Zorina began to entertain these thoughts, her old fears and doubts crept back in. She had spent her entire life protecting the purity of her people, guarding their culture and traditions. Could she really throw that all away for a human soldier who believed in something she couldn't fully understand? She spent long nights walking through the halls of her palace, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. She had never felt so conflicted. Every part of her told her to reject John, to reject the idea of cooperation with humans. But a small part of her, the part that had never been allowed to speak out loud, began to wonder if there was another way. Meanwhile, John was doing everything he could to strengthen the bond between the two species. He continued to meet with Zorina, always patient, always respectful of her position. But he could sense the hesitation in her. He knew that his words alone would not be enough to change her mind. It would take time, trust, and actions that spoke louder than words. One evening, as Zorina stood on the balcony of her palace, she felt a presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. John had been visiting her more often, but tonight felt different. She could feel the tension in the air, a sense that something was about to shift. "You've been avoiding me," John said quietly, his voice soft but filled with understanding. Zorina didn't turn to face him. "I'm not avoiding you, John, I'm thinking." "I understand," he replied. "This isn't easy, but you don't have to carry this burden alone. You're not the only one who's uncertain. I feel it too. We're both trying to figure out what's best for our people." Zorina felt a pang in her chest. She had always thought that the Zorathians were strong enough to stand alone, but now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure. She had heard the whispers of her people, the fear that they would be weakened by alliances with humans. But she couldn't ignore the hope that John's words had planted in her heart. She turned to face him, her expression serious. What if I fail? What if I'm wrong, and our people suffer because of this? John stepped closer, his eyes steady and calm. Then we'll face it together. We'll learn from it and keep moving forward. We're all humans, Arena. We make mistakes, but we keep going. That's how we survive. And if you choose to work with me, I promise I will do everything in my power to make sure your people don't suffer. Serena's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard words like that from anyone before. John wasn't offering empty promises. He was offering his heart, his trust, and his willingness to fight alongside her. But even as she felt that pull toward him, the doubts lingered. The pressure of her people's expectations weighed heavily on her. Her advisors had been growing, more vocal in their disapproval of her meetings with John. They were beginning to question her loyalty to the Zorathian way. The more she entertained the idea of working with the humans, the more resistance she faced from her own people. Serena's heart ached as she thought of the consequences of her decisions. Could she truly betray her people's beliefs? Could she go against everything she had been taught for the sake of a future that was still uncertain? You don't understand, John, Serena said, her voice cracking slightly. My people, they won't accept this. They won't accept you. They'll see me as weak, as someone who has abandoned our ways. John's face softened and he reached out to gently touch her arm. You're not weak. You're strong, Serena. And I don't want you to lose your people. I want you to lead them to a future where they're safe, where they don't have to live in fear of what's to come. I want to help you. Serena closed her eyes, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had always believed that strength came from standing firm, from refusing to bend. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe true strength was in being able to bend without breaking, to allow her people to evolve and adapt to the changing universe around them. I wish it were that simple, she whispered, but I have to do what's right for them, not just for me. John nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I know. But sometimes what's right for one person is right for everyone. It's not about doing what's easiest. It's about doing what's best. Zorina didn't answer. Instead, she turned away, looking out over the vast horizon, the stars shining brightly in the night sky. The universe was full of uncertainty, full of things they didn't understand. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope for something more. A future where the Zorathians and humans could stand together, facing the challenges ahead as allies, not enemies. I'll need time, Serena said, her voice steady now. But I'm not saying no. I'm not saying yes either. I need to think, to decide what's best for everyone. John nodded. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, whenever you're ready. Serena watched him for a moment, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Maybe there was a way forward. Maybe with John's help they could find it together. The days that followed Zorena's decision to consider cooperation with the humans were filled with quiet reflection. She spent hours alone, walking through the palace gardens, or sitting by the large windows of her chambers, gazing out at the world below. The weight of her responsibilities pressed heavily on her shoulders. The future of her people and the future of the humans lay in her hands. Serena had always believed that strength came from isolation, from keeping to one's own kind and culture. But after the battle, and after spending time with John, something had begun to change. She could feel it deep inside herself. Something that had been buried for years was beginning to rise to the surface. The fear of losing her people, of betraying her ancestors, still lingered. But so did the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. John had given her something she hadn't expected. Hope. Hope for a future where her people could survive. Not just by holding on to the past, but by adapting to a new world, a new reality. He had shown her that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about understanding, about trusting others, and about working together for a common goal. But Zarina knew that making this decision would not be easy. Her people were proud, and many of them would never accept the idea of working with humans. The fear of change was strong in them, and it was a fear that Zorina herself had shared for much of her life. But now, standing on the brink of something new, she couldn't ignore the pull toward a future that might be better for everyone. One evening, as Zarina sat alone in her chambers, she received a message from John. It was brief, just a simple invitation to meet, but it was enough to stir something within her. She had been avoiding him for days, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. But now as she read his message, she knew that it was time to face the decision that had been haunting her. Zarina stood and walked to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew that she couldn't continue to live in uncertainty. She had to make a choice. When she arrived at the meeting place, a small courtyard near the palace, John was already there, waiting for her. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the stars. As she approached, he turned and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You came," he said, his voice warm and gentle. Zarina nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I've been thinking about everything you said, about the future, about our people." John stepped closer, his eyes soft with understanding. "And?" Zarina took a deep breath, her mind made up. "I've spent my whole life protecting my people from outside influences, from what I thought would weaken us. But now I see that strength isn't just about isolation. It's about adaptability, about understanding the world around us and learning from it." John's face lit up with a quiet joy, but Zarina held up her hand to stop him. "But," she continued, her voice steady, "I cannot promise that everyone will accept this. I cannot promise that all of the Zorathians will agree with this decision." "I understand," John replied softly, "but you're not doing this for them, Zarina. You're doing this for the future, for your people's survival." Zarina looked at him for a long moment. The conflict that had raged inside her was still there, but it was no longer as strong. She had spent her life following tradition, but now she realized tradition had to evolve. Her people had to evolve, and if she was to lead them, she had to be the one to show them the way forward. "I've decided," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We will work with the humans. We will offer our help, and we will join forces to face the challenges ahead." John's smile widened, and for a moment Zarina saw something in his eyes: pride, respect, and hope. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched. Zarina hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to shake his hand. "We'll do this together," John said, his voice filled with certainty. "We'll make this work, Zarina." Zarina nodded, the weight on her shoulders feeling lighter than it had in days. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that it was possible. It was a future of cooperation, not conflict. A future where both species could survive and thrive. The next few weeks were filled with action. Zarina and John worked together, meeting with the Zorathian leaders and explaining the decision. There was resistance, of course. Many of the older leaders, those who had grown up with the old beliefs, were furious. They saw the cooperation with humans as a betrayal of everything they had fought for. But Zarina stood firm, her voice steady and unwavering. She explained the necessity of the alliance, the strength that could be gained from it, and the future they could build together. Slowly but surely, the resistance began to soften. There were still those who refused to accept the idea, but more and more the Zorathians began to understand. They saw the potential, the promise of a stronger future, and they began to trust in Zarina's leadership. The human delegation, led by John, arrived on Norath to formalize the agreement. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Zarina stood beside John, her heart swelling with pride as they signed the treaty. It was a moment of history, a moment that would be remembered for generations to come. As the ceremony came to a close, Zarina looked out at the crowd, seeing the faces of her people. They were no longer the same people they had been before. The fear was still there, but it was fading. The uncertainty was still present, but it was beginning to be replaced by something new: hope. "We've taken the first step," Zarina said quietly to John, her voice filled with emotion. "But the journey ahead will be long. We have a lot of work to do." John smiled at her, his eyes full of confidence. "We'll do it together." And in that moment, Zorina knew that they had made the right choice. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it.